July 17, 2014. Above the fields of eastern Ukraine, air traffic controllers watch a blip vanish from their screens. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, a Boeing 777 carrying 283 passengers and 15 crew, has gone silent roughly 50 kilometers from the Ukraine-Russia border. Within minutes, burning wreckage begins falling near a village called Rabov. There is no distress call, no warning. In an instant, 298 lives are gone, and a war few outside the region had noticed becomes impossible to ignore. Hours earlier, Flight 17 departed Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport bound for Kuala Lumpur, also marketed as KLM Flight 4103 under a codeshare agreement. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200ER, registration 9M, MRD, a workhorse with more than 76,300 flight hours logged across 11,430 cycles. The 777 held one of the best safety records of any commercial airliner, with over 1,200 in service worldwide by mid-2014. Nothing about this aircraft, or this crew, suggested anything but a routine long-haul flight. Aboard were 283 passengers and 15 crew, all of them Malaysian nationals working the cabin and cockpit. Captains Wan Amran Wan Hussein and Eugene Chu Jean Leong commanded a combined 25,000 flight hours between them. More than two-thirds of the passengers were Dutch, joined by Malaysians, Australians, and citizens of 7 other nations. At least 20 family groups were traveling together, and 80 of those aboard were children under 18 years old. Among the passengers were delegates traveling to the 20th International AIDS Conference in Melbourne, including Jope Lang, a former president of the International AIDS Society. Early reports wrongly claimed around 100 conference delegates were aboard. The true number was later confirmed as 6. Also on the plane were Dutch Senator Willem Witteveen, Australian novelist Liam Davison, and Malaysian actress Shuba J. Ordinary travelers, scientists, families, and public figures, all bound for lives that would never resume. To understand why Flight 17 was flying over this particular stretch of sky, you have to understand the war beneath it. Since early 2014, the war in Donbass had raged between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists. Some airlines had already begun avoiding eastern Ukrainian airspace that March, wary of the fighting below. But many international carriers, including Malaysia Airlines, continued to fly the route, treating it as safe cruising altitude above a ground war. For months, warning signs had been accumulating in plain sight. Media reports described surface-to-air missiles falling into rebel hands, and on May 26, Ukrainian military officials claimed to have destroyed a separatist missile system near Donetsk airport. In June, reports surfaced of missiles seized from military bases, and a newspaper reported a Buk M1 launcher operating in separatist-controlled territory. Air defense systems like these cannot reliably distinguish military aircraft from civilian airliners flying thousands of feet overhead. On June 29, Russian news agencies reported that insurgents had captured a Buk missile system after seizing Ukrainian military unit A-1402. The self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic even claimed possession of such a system in a tweet, later deleted. Ukrainian authorities publicly insisted the system was not operational. Yet, 3 Buk missile systems were reportedly located in militia-held territory in the weeks before July 17, a detail that would prove devastating. At cruising altitude, unaware of what waited below, Flight 17 crossed into this contested airspace like countless flights before it. The aircraft was airworthy, the crew experienced, the skies seemingly clear. But somewhere in a field controlled by pro-Russian separatists, a missile crew was preparing a launcher that had arrived from Russia that very day. The countdown to catastrophe had already begun, invisible to everyone thousands of feet above. At the critical moment, a Buk 9M38 surface-to-air missile launched from a field in rebel-held territory in Donetsk Oblast. It streaked upward and struck the Boeing 777 mid-flight, tearing the aircraft apart at altitude. There was no chance for the crew to respond, no distress call broadcast, no time for evasive action. In seconds, one of the world's safest aircraft became the site of the deadliest airliner shootdown in history. Debris rained down across the countryside near Rabov, a small village in Donetsk Oblast some 40 kilometers from the Russian border. Wreckage, luggage, and human remains were scattered across sunflower fields and farmland, a scene of unimaginable devastation in a place already gripped by war. Separatist fighters, not international investigators, were first to reach the site. For days, the wreckage sat exposed in territory neither fully secured nor fully accessible to the outside world. News of the disaster spread within hours, and the world reacted with horror. This was Malaysia Airlines' second catastrophic loss of 2014, following the disappearance of Flight 370 just 4 months earlier. Grieving nations, especially the Netherlands, which lost the majority of the passengers, demanded answers. Yet the crash site sat inside a war zone controlled by armed separatists, complicating any effort to recover bodies or investigate what had actually happened. Responsibility for uncovering the truth fell to the Dutch Safety Board and a Dutch-led joint investigation team, working alongside partner nations. Investigators faced enormous obstacles: a live conflict zone, disturbed wreckage, and a site initially controlled by the very forces suspected of the attack. Painstakingly, they pieced together radar data, missile fragments, and witness accounts. What they would eventually uncover pointed directly toward the origin of the weapon that destroyed the aircraft. In 2016, the Joint Investigation Team delivered its findings. The Buk missile that destroyed Flight 17 originated from the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade of the Russian Federation. It had been transported from Russia into Ukraine on the very day of the crash, fired from separatist-controlled territory, and the launch system was driven back across the border into Russia the following day. The evidence trail led, unmistakably, back to Moscow. These conclusions did not stand alone. They were consistent with earlier assessments from American and German intelligence agencies, as well as claims made by the Ukrainian government in the days after the crash. Multiple independent sources, working separately, arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about where the missile came from and who had fired it. The weight of corroborating evidence made the case increasingly difficult to dispute. Russia's government denied any involvement from the outset, and its official account shifted repeatedly over the following years. Russian state media initially reported that separatist forces had shot down a Ukrainian Air Force and 26 transport plane, not a civilian airliner. That narrative later changed entirely, with Russian outlets instead blaming Ukrainian forces for downing MH17. The contradictions themselves became part of the story the world was watching unfold. Armed with the Joint Investigation Team's conclusions, the governments of the Netherlands and Australia formally held Russia responsible for deploying the Buk missile system. In May 2018, both nations began pursuing legal remedies against Russia on the international stage. It marked a rare moment of two sovereign governments directly accusing another state of orchestrating a deadly attack on a civilian passenger aircraft and demanding accountability through formal diplomatic and legal channels. Years later, on November 17, 2022, a Dutch court delivered its verdict after a trial held in absentia. 2 Russian nationals and 1 Ukrainian separatist were found guilty of murdering all 298 people aboard Flight 17. The court went further, ruling that Russia had exercised overall control over the separatist forces fighting in eastern Ukraine at the time of the attack. Justice, however delayed, had finally been formally rendered. Flight 17 remains the deadliest aircraft shoot-down incident in history, a tragedy born from a war that most passengers never knew they were flying over. It stands as Malaysia Airlines' second devastating loss of 2014, a haunting bookend to an already catastrophic year for the airline. Nearly 300 families were left with unanswered questions for years before any court delivered a verdict. Their search for truth and justice continues to shape how the world remembers that July afternoon. The story of Flight 17 is a reminder of how quickly a distant conflict can reach into the sky and touch the entire world. 298 people boarded a plane expecting nothing more than a long flight home. If this story moved you, share it and help keep their memory and the demand for truth alive for future generations.